I wanted to get away from home. I wanted the opportunity to excel. I was not interested in my high school. My grades were failing. And at 17, I quit school and joined the Marine Corps for an opportunity for an adventure.
Picture this, 1965, the beginning of the Vietnam War. You joined Force Recon, off to battle, let's go.
But don't worry. You're going to be too busy to worry.
In the Marine Corps, we talk body, mind, and spirit development of the whole man.
And they were recruiting for people to go into Force Recon, which was newly formed. And that was immediately, I knew that's what I wanted to do. To be a parachutist, a scuba diver, jungle gear, submachine.
It's a disciplined struggle for life, hinging upon the...
It's 1965. The first batch of Marines landed in Vietnam, an amphibious landing. Before that, 1962, there had been some advisors, some air support there. So he signs up. The Vietnam War had not really kicked off. It wasn't all over the newspapers. Remember, no internet. He joins up, become a man, right? Sounds like fun, jumping out of planes, diving, and shooting big guns.
The thing a young 17, 18-year-old would want to do. I was accepted into the program, and it was a one-year training program to be qualified as a Recon Marine. And at the end of that 1 year, we transferred to Vietnam.
So as you heard later on in the war, training programs got smaller and smaller. 1 year, pretty substantial amount of training even by today's standards. So he gets the time to learn his craft, hopefully become more prepared when he heads off to Vietnam. So you can take a look at this timeline of the Vietnam War. 62, there's some Marine advisors and air support, but really 65, March 65 is when it kicks off with the 1st Battalion of Marines landing in an amphibious landing.
So we were highly trained when we arrived in Vietnam. We were well schooled in what Vietnam was all about. So we were probably much better prepared to go to Vietnam than most units because we trained for a year just to be deployed to Vietnam. So Vietnam really wasn't a concern until I arrived.
Born of time, necessity, and circumstance, and nurtured to near perfection under fire during the Pacific Campaign of World War II.
So this was the footage of the amphibious landing in 1965. So when he got there, it could have been 66 if he joined up in 65. But really the escalation, the first casualties. U.S. was still finding its way in Vietnam, but 65, 66.
The amphibious assault has become the trademark of the Navy Marine Corps team.
And the first shots were fired. And then I realized this is a real combat. It's life and death. It's serious. You make a mistake, you die or someone else dies. And you live with life and death virtually every day.
It's a helicopter picking up medevac, lifting out of.
The first tour I was wounded, medevaced out, and I was wounded on my second tour, medevaced out.
66, 67. Most people had an obligation of one tour, 13 months. He could have probably gone back to the States and done training. He goes back to Vietnam, doing his job as a Recon Marine.
If you can imagine me, a 17-year-old with no motivation, no vision, no opportunity. I liked cars and girls in high school.
Whatever your talent, if you've got the interest, the will, there's a place for you in the Marine Corps.
And to get into the Marine Corps took literally a living, breathing 17-year-old and turned me into everything I am today.
So you see back, that footage was recruiting footage, 1965, 66. Whole different ballgame in how we recruited people. And you had a lot of people that may or may not have a high school diploma that joined the military because they wanted to grow up. They were problem children.
And I've accomplished a lot in my life, and it's because of walking across that parade deck. sends chills up my spine, to be quite honest, to see these young Marines. They look just like me. And
now you may say, what's the big deal about going to Marine Corps boot camp? And it's not Marine Corps boot camp. It could be the Army. You're such a young person, and it's such a formative stage in your life. And it changes things. It's like the first time you got your groove on. You remember that. It's a part of life that you'll always remember, whether you serve 30 years in or 4 years in. It's a big turning point in your life, and it's a challenge that you never faced as a 17, 18-year-old. That's why people talk about it in this fashion, even at this point for this fella.
1965, and I think Marines of today are just like the Marines of the 1960s. It's just a different generation, but I still believe that the Marine Corps turns out a fine member of the Marine Corps.
Now, this video was put out by the Marine Corps, and I would say that you could meet a Marine from 30 years ago or 30 years from now, and there is somewhat of a common bond you have. How things change, whether it be the Emmas in the Army, or whatever marketing pieces that are putting out that are less than savory in somebody's eyes. I do find that you have a common bond with other jarheads. What reason? I don't know.
Functional member of the Marine Corps. He's ready to do what he's asked to do, or she is asked to do what she's supposed to do. So I think the big thing that caught my eye probably is the number of females that are integrated into the entire system, which is a good thing. I think it's a great thing. Back in the 60s, the mindset was not that way. There's female Marines and then there's real Marines. And that's not like that anymore. A Marine's a Marine.
Well, he's talking about the 60s. I'll talk about 1990. It was the same thing. There was, you'd say, WMs for women Marines. I never thought twice about it. I know that's changed. He was in, we'll call it 30 years before, 30 years later. It was still somewhat of a differentiator because women weren't in any combat MOSs up until, I believe, the late 90s.
You got to seize the opportunity to be that 1 or 2 or 3%er. As a young Marine, don't get into that rut and accept that as satisfactory. It's not.
Now, that is a good point. Take advantage of every moment you have when you're in the military. It's a fleeting point in your life. There's a lot to grow from if you take the opportunity.
You know, seize that opportunity. Shoot for the top in everything you do, and you'll be successful.
Do you belong here in these ranks of Marines? Marines aren't born into the Corps. Everyone has come out of another, different kind of life. A few months ago, he was finishing high school. Now he's training as a Marine electronics specialist.